The internet is completely divided right now because what started as a rumor about Jay-Z's alleged hidden family situation has now exploded into one of the most controversial and emotionally charged celebrity stories online. We're talking paternity claims, federal lawsuits, leaked interviews, DNA allegations, family secrets, and a wave of viral statements that are now pulling Blue Ivy's name into the center of a storm nobody expected. At the heart of it all is Rymir Satterthwaite, a man claiming for years that Jay-Z is his biological father, backed by emotional testimony, legal attempts, and a long history involving his late mother's own statements about her connection to the rapper. But this isn't just a simple he said, she said situation anymore. Because now reports, interviews, and online discussions are suggesting that pressure, legal complications, and even family dynamics may have played a role in how this situation was handled or allegedly avoided. And that's where things take a sharp turn. With Blue Ivy's name now being mentioned in connection to the emotional fallout and claims suggesting tension within the family due to resurfacing allegations, the story has shifted from old rumors into something far more explosive. Add in the court filings, the DNA test disputes, the dropped lawsuit, and the ongoing speculation about what really happened behind the scenes. And you get a narrative that feels bigger than just one man's claim. So the real question now is simple. Is this finally the truth coming to light, or just another layer of celebrity rumors spiraling out of control? Because once you dive into the full story, nothing looks simple anymore. So the real question now is simple. Is this finally the truth coming to light, or just another layer of celebrity rumors spiraling out of control? Because once you dive into the full story, nothing looks simple anymore. To understand how this situation even reached this point, we have to go all the way back to the origin of the claim involving Rymir Satterthwaite and his late mother, Wanda Satterthwaite. According to Rymir's public statements, this entire story begins in the early 1990s. He has long claimed that Jay-Z is his biological father, based on what his mother allegedly told him throughout his life. Rymir's version of events says that Wanda Satterthwaite met Jay-Z through mutual connections in the music scene before he became a global superstar. At the time, he was still building his name in the industry, long before the empire and fame that followed. Now, according to Wanda's alleged statements, things moved quickly after that initial meeting. She reportedly described a situation where she and Jay-Z spent time together, and that encounter led to a pregnancy. But here's where the situation becomes complicated. Because Wanda allegedly claimed that although protection was used, it failed, leading to Rymir's birth. From her perspective, she believed Jay-Z was the biological father. But the problem was never just the claim. It was the lack of official acknowledgement. As time passed, Wanda reportedly attempted multiple times to contact Jay-Z or his representatives to address the situation. But according to the claims, she was either ignored or never received a clear response. This silence, according to Rymir, is what fueled decades of unanswered questions. Eventually, Wanda listed another man as the legal father on Rymir's birth certificate, which further complicated the situation legally. But even after that, Rymir says the truth never changed from his perspective. He still believed Jay-Z was his biological father. As Rymir grew older, he began publicly speaking about his claims. At first, it didn't gain much mainstream attention. But over time, especially with the rise of social media, the story started circulating more widely. And that's when things started getting more intense. Because once a claim like this enters the public space, especially involving someone as globally recognized as Jay-Z, it immediately becomes a media storm. But Rymir wasn't just making statements online. He also began pursuing legal action. According to reports, Rymir attempted to initiate court proceedings to request a formal DNA test in order to confirm paternity. However, what followed was a long and complicated legal path. Court filings, procedural delays, and legal responses from Jay-Z's side all contributed to slowing the process down significantly. Jay-Z's legal team reportedly pushed back against the claims, arguing that the allegations were not substantiated and should not proceed without proper legal grounds. This led to the case becoming entangled in legal back-and-forth motion, rather than moving directly toward a resolution. Meanwhile, Rymir's supporters argued that he was simply seeking clarity and closure, not attention or controversy. But critics viewed the situation differently, suggesting that without verified evidence, such claims should not be amplified publicly. This divide is what kept the story alive online. Two completely opposing perspectives. One side demanding truth and testing, the other questioning legitimacy and timing. And in the middle of it all, the internet turned it into ongoing entertainment. But the situation became even more complex when additional claims surfaced from people connected to Rymir's side. His godmother, who has been publicly involved in supporting his case, began speaking in interviews about alleged behind-the-scenes developments. She claimed that at one point, there were indications that Jay-Z's side might be open to resolving the matter privately. But according to her, that direction reportedly changed later, leading to more legal resistance and less communication. This shift, according to her statements, is where the situation became more tense. She suggested that once legal teams became more involved, everything became more restricted, structured, and controlled. And instead of progressing toward clarity, the case became more complicated. Now, this is where public interpretation starts to split even further. Because while some people view this as a normal legal defense strategy, others interpret it as avoidance. And that difference in perception is exactly what fuels ongoing debate. But the most sensitive part of this entire story begins to emerge when discussions shift toward timing and personal circumstances. According to claims made by Rymir's supporters, Wanda's age at the time of the alleged encounter becomes a critical detail in the narrative. This is where legal and ethical concerns intersect with the story, making it far more controversial. However, it's important to note that these claims remain part of disputed narratives and have not been legally confirmed in a court ruling. Still, the discussion surrounding them has played a major role in how the public perceives the situation. And as more voices entered the conversation, interviews, online commentators, and media personalities, the story began expanding far beyond its original scope. It was no longer just about paternity. It became about power, reputation, legacy, and public image. And once those elements enter a story, it becomes almost impossible to separate fact from interpretation. At the same time, Rymir continued insisting that his goal was not fame or financial gain, but simply biological truth and recognition. He repeatedly stated that his motivation came from years of unanswered questions and his mother's belief that the truth had never been properly addressed. And that emotional foundation is what makes the story resonate with some viewers, even if others remain skeptical. Because at its core, this is not just a legal claim. It is also a deeply personal identity question. Who am I? Where do I come from? And why has this never been resolved? These are the questions driving the narrative forward. But just when it seemed like the story was staying focused on Rymir's legal battle, a new layer entered the conversation, one that brought Blue Ivy's name into the discussion. And that shift changed everything again. Because now the story was no longer just about the past. It was also being connected to the present generation of Jay-Z's family. And that connection is exactly where the situation becomes even more controversial, more emotional, and far more publicly debated. Which leads directly into the next phase of this unfolding story. And that leads us directly into the next phase of this unfolding story, where everything shifts from a historical paternity claim into a modern-day family narrative involving Jay-Z's current life, his image, and the people closest to him. Because once Blue Ivy's name entered the conversation, the entire situation stopped being just about the past. It started becoming about legacy. And legacy is something that is extremely sensitive when it comes to global figures like Jay-Z. Blue Ivy, as the daughter of Jay-Z and Beyonce, has always been seen in the public eye as part of a carefully protected family structure. From award show appearances to controlled media moments, her presence has always been intentional, minimal, and highly managed. So when online discussions began linking her to the resurfacing claims involving Rymir Satterthwaite, the internet reaction became immediate and intense. Some users started speculating that she might somehow become aware of the ongoing allegations surrounding her father's past. Others went even further, suggesting that the pressure of public rumors could potentially affect how the family handles sensitive topics internally. However, it is extremely important to separate speculation from confirmed fact. There is no verified evidence that Blue Ivy is directly involved in or affected by any legal or biological claims being made by Rymir. But in the world of social media storytelling, perception often moves faster than confirmation. And that is exactly what happened here. As discussion spread, people began attaching emotional narratives to Blue Ivy's name, suggesting discomfort, distance, or awareness of the situation. Again, these remain unverified interpretations circulating online, not confirmed statements. But once a narrative gains traction online, it begins to shape public perception regardless of official confirmation. Meanwhile, in the background of all this speculation, Jay-Z's public image remains largely composed and controlled. In interviews and public appearances, he has consistently maintained focus on his career, business ventures, and family life with Beyonce and Blue Ivy. Most recently, comments attributed to him highlight pride in his daughter's growth, achievements, and maturity, reinforcing a stable family image. This contrast between public stability and online speculation is one of the reasons the story continues to trend. Because the internet thrives on contradiction. And in this case, the contradiction is between what is publicly presented and what is being discussed online. But while the Blue Ivy narrative adds emotional weight to the story, the legal core of the situation remains focused on Rymir's ongoing claims. Even after previous legal attempts were dropped or stalled, Rymir has continued to express that he is still seeking answers through proper channels. According to his statements, stepping back from certain legal actions was not the end of his pursuit, but rather a strategic pause. He has repeatedly emphasized that the issue is not about attention, but about resolution. However, legal systems operate on evidence, procedure, and verification. And without court-mandated confirmation, such cases often remain unresolved for extended periods. That is part of what makes this story so complicated. Because on one side, there is emotional testimony, personal history, and identity questions. And on the other side, there is legal structure, documentation, and procedural barriers. And in between those two sides lies public opinion, constantly shifting, reacting, and amplifying every new detail. Adding to the complexity, online platforms have introduced another layer of confusion through viral posts, edited clips, and speculative commentary. Some creators present theories as facts, while others break down legal angles without official confirmation. This creates a cycle where information becomes fragmented, and audiences often struggle to distinguish between verified developments and narrative speculation. And that is exactly what keeps this story alive in digital spaces. Because every new video, post, or discussion reignites interest. Every reinterpretation adds another layer. And every reaction expands the story further beyond its original scope. Meanwhile, supporters of Rymir continue to argue that his case deserves formal resolution through DNA testing and legal clarity. They believe that the truth, whatever it may be, should be confirmed directly rather than debated endlessly online. On the opposite side, skeptics question the validity of the claims due to lack of court-confirmed evidence and the passage of time between the alleged events and present-day assertions. This divide is what keeps public discourse polarized. And in the center of that divide stands Jay-Z, whose public persona remains largely unaffected on the surface, but continuously referenced within the narrative. But the most emotionally charged part of this entire situation is not the legal argument. It is the human element behind it. Because at its core, this is a story about identity, recognition, and unresolved questions that have spanned decades. For Rymir, the narrative is not just about proving a claim, it is about understanding his origin and reconciling with his personal history. For Jay-Z, the situation represents the challenge of managing allegations that intersect with privacy, reputation, and family protection. And for the public, it becomes a story that exists somewhere between truth and interpretation. Then comes the final layer of complexity, the way modern media transforms private disputes into global conversations. In earlier decades, stories like this would remain confined to courtrooms and private legal channels. But today, they evolve in real time across social platforms, YouTube commentary channels, and viral discussions. And that transformation changes everything. Because once a story becomes public content, it no longer belongs solely to the people involved. It becomes part of collective interpretation. And that is why this situation continues to grow instead of fade. Even without official updates, even without confirmed rulings, and even without resolution, the narrative continues to circulate. Because it is not just about what is proven. It is about what is being discussed. And as long as unanswered questions remain in the public space, the conversation will continue to evolve. Which leads us into the final realization of this entire situation. That in the modern digital era, truth is not only determined in courtrooms anymore, it is also shaped in timelines, comment sections, and viral narratives that never fully stop moving. Which leads us into the final realization of this entire situation. That in the modern digital era, truth is not only determined in courtrooms anymore, it is also shaped in timelines, comment sections, and viral narratives that never fully stop moving. Because at this stage, what we are witnessing is no longer just a legal or personal dispute. It has transformed into a global online phenomenon where history, speculation, emotion, and interpretation all exist at the same time. And that is exactly why this story refuses to disappear. Even when there are no new court rulings, even when there are no official confirmations, even when the main figures are silent, the conversation continues. Because the internet does not wait for closure. It fills gaps with theory, emotion, and debate. And in this case, those gaps are very large. On one side, Raimir Satterthwaite's supporters continue to argue that the situation deserves a final resolution through DNA testing and legal acknowledgement. From their perspective, the core issue has always been simple: confirm or deny through science and end the uncertainty. They believe that decades of claims, testimonies, and attempted legal actions should eventually lead to a definitive answer, one way or the other. But on the other side, skepticism remains strong. Many question why, after so many years, there is still no confirmed legal conclusion. They point to the lack of verified court outcomes and emphasize that serious claims require equally serious evidence to move forward conclusively. And in between those two perspectives sits the public, watching, reacting, debating, and reshaping the narrative in real time. But the most interesting part of this entire situation is not just the disagreement. It is how the story evolves every time it is discussed. Because once Blue Ivy's name entered the conversation, the tone of the entire narrative shifted. It was no longer just about an alleged past encounter. It became about legacy, reputation, and generational impact. Blue Ivy represents the present and future image of the Carter family. So when her name becomes connected rightly or wrongly to older unresolved claims, the emotional weight of the story increases dramatically in public perception. Even without confirmation, the idea alone changes how audiences interpret the situation. And that is one of the strongest forces in modern media. Perception itself becomes part of the story. At the same time, Jay-Z continues to maintain his public image through controlled appearances, interviews, and carefully managed media presence. His focus remains on music legacy, business empire building, and family life. In many public moments, he has emphasized pride in his daughter and stability within his household, reinforcing a narrative of structure and success. But online, that narrative exists alongside an entirely different layer of discussion, one driven by speculation, resurfaced claims, and historical allegations that never fully disappeared from public memory. And that dual reality is what keeps this situation alive. Two narratives existing at once, one official and structured, one speculative and constantly evolving, neither fully erasing the other. Adding to the complexity is how modern digital culture processes stories like this. In earlier eras, unresolved claims often faded due to lack of media amplification. But today, even old allegations can resurface instantly, fueled by algorithms, commentary channels, and viral reposts. This creates a cycle where stories re-enter public consciousness repeatedly, even years later. And each time they return, they are reshaped by new context, new audiences, new interpretations, new emotional reactions. And that is exactly what has happened here. What began as a claim rooted in the 1990s has now evolved into a multi-layered digital narrative involving legal action, family identity, celebrity culture, and generational reputation. But underneath all of that complexity, the human core of the story still remains. At its foundation, this is about a person seeking clarity about identity, and another person whose legacy and privacy are being protected under intense public scrutiny. That tension between truth-seeking and privacy protection is what makes this situation so difficult to resolve cleanly. Because both sides exist in fundamentally different frameworks. One seeks emotional closure. The other operates within legal and reputational boundaries. And those two systems do not always align. Meanwhile, public engagement ensures that the story never fully settles. Every discussion reignites interest. Every new post adds interpretation. And every resurfaced clip adds another layer of complexity. But perhaps the most important takeaway from this entire situation is not about proving or disproving specific claims. It is about how modern storytelling works. Because in today's world, narratives are no longer linear. They are continuous. They expand, contract, and evolve based on attention, discussion, and digital amplification. And in that environment, even unresolved stories can feel ongoing indefinitely. Which is why this situation, regardless of outcome, will likely continue to resurface in cycles. Not because of new confirmations, but because of persistent curiosity. And as long as that curiosity exists, the conversation will not fully end. Instead, it will continue to shift forms. From legal discussion, to online theory, to cultural debate, and back again. And so, when people ask whether the story is real, exaggerated, or unresolved, the most accurate answer might not be one or the other. It might simply be this: it is a story still being written not in court documents alone, but in the collective voice of the internet. And until there is absolute, verified closure from official channels, one thing is certain: this narrative is not over. It is only evolving. And the world is still watching every new chapter unfold.